On the night before Thanksgiving week, I learned I was no longer part of my own family. I was standing in my kitchen, folding napkins that still smelled faintly of starch and cinnamon, when the phone rang. The name glowing on the screen, Hannah Foster, made me smile before I even picked up. My only daughter. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, hit answer, and said, "Hey, sweetheart, you caught me in the middle of getting ready for the big day." Her pause should have told me everything. Not the distracted kind, but the one you take before speaking words you've rehearsed, because you know they'll land badly. "Mom," she said at last, her voice too calm. "We're doing something smaller this year. Dylan's parents are hosting. It'll be aimed simpler." Simpler. The word fell softly, but it cut all the same. I kept folding the napkin in my hands, pretending I hadn't just been erased from my own tradition. "Smaller, huh?" I tried to laugh, but it came out thin and breakable. "Do I count as extra stuffing or just a leftover?" No answer, just the measured sound of her breathing. "Please don't make this harder, Mom. It's just what we need this year." What we need, not you and me, just we, her new family, the one with matching sweaters and curated smiles. I could almost see her in that spotless Columbus kitchen I helped them pay for, twisting the phone cord while Dylan watched from across the room. I searched for something to say that wouldn't sound like begging. "You know I already bought the cranberries," I murmured, trying to sound helpful, not desperate. "The boys love my sauce. Remember how Ben said it beats the canned kind?" Her sigh crackled through the line. "Mom, please. Dylan's parents already have everything planned. It's easier this way." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Easier. Somehow that word stung worse than smaller. Easier to leave me out. Easier not to explain. Easier to pretend the woman who raised her wasn't standing in a farmhouse 3 hours away, ironing the same tablecloth she'd used every Thanksgiving since her husband died. "Sure, honey," I said. "Whatever makes things simpler." My voice cracked on the last word. She must have heard it because her tone softened. "I hope you understand." "I do," I lied. I understood too well. This was the polite kind of exile, wrapped in good intentions, tied with a neat little bow of "don't take it personally." When the call ended, I stood frozen, the phone still in my hand. The lamplight caught the silverware I'd polished earlier, glinting like little mirrors reflecting a life that no longer seemed to fit. I set the phone down and waited for the wave of hurt to pass. It didn't. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, a soft whisper. My chest tightened as if the air itself had gone cold. I looked at the half-folded napkins, the good china stacked beside them. Every small thing in that kitchen reminded me I'd been preparing for a celebration that no longer had a place for me. I thought of all the years I'd hosted, the way Hannah used to sneak bites of pie crust, the way her father carved the turkey while pretending not to cry when she said grace. I could still see her small hand resting on his, the two of them laughing over gravy gone wrong. I had built every holiday around those moments, around her smile. Now she was building new ones without me. The phone buzzed again. Hannah Foster. My thumb hovered over the screen. Not this time. I let it ring, once, twice, again, then set it face down. The silence that followed was heavier than the ticking clock. I stayed there for a long time, unable to move. I wanted to be angry, but anger wouldn't come. Only that dull ache, the kind that sits in your throat and makes you swallow too hard. Her words replayed one by one. Smaller. Easier. Please don't make this harder. She'd spoken like I was a burden to manage, not a mother to love. Resentment crept in, slowly, quiet as snowfall. How many times had I rearranged my life for her? The weekends I drove 3 hours for the boys' soccer games. The nights I sent grocery money without being asked. The months I helped pay their mortgage when Dylan was between jobs. None of that had ever been simpler for me. But love isn't supposed to be simple. Apparently now it was. I caught my reflection in the dark window, hair pinned back, apron dusted with flour, eyes tired but not broken. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone waiting for an invitation that would never arrive. The phone buzzed again, rattling against the counter like it was trying to escape its own shame. I didn't move. If I answered, she'd say something soft enough to keep me tethered. "Next year, Mom," or "It's just this once." Words meant to soothe me into silence. I'd swallowed enough polite excuses for one lifetime. I turned off the kitchen light. The street lamp outside cast a pale gold glow across the room. Everything looked smaller. Even the house that used to feel so full. The smell of nutmeg lingered in the air, sweet and stubborn, clinging to the edges of the evening. I leaned against the counter and whispered, mostly to myself, "Just what you need, huh?" My voice trembled, but beneath it was something new. Bitterness, sharp as metal on the tongue. I wondered if she'd even notice my empty seat at that polished table in Columbus. Maybe she'd raise her glass and tell herself I was fine here in Cedar Falls, too busy or too content to mind. Maybe that lie would make it easier for her. It should have hurt more. Instead, it left a strange stillness, like the quiet after a storm that's already wrung itself out. I wasn't fine, but I was done pretending. Outside, a few flakes of snow drifted down, soft against the glass. I watched them for a moment, then turned back to the table. The napkins lay in a neat row beside the plates. I brushed my fingertips across the fabric before gathering them up one by one. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd put them away. The house was still, the phone finally silent. And for the first time in my life, I didn't chase after someone to make them love me. I simply stood in the quiet and let it hold me. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay in bed with the ceiling staring back at me, listening to the wind press against the windows of the old farmhouse. The house had always creaked, but tonight every sound felt amplified, like the walls themselves were asking what I had done to deserve being pushed aside. I kept replaying Hannah's words in my head. "It's just easier this way." The more I heard them, the heavier they grew, settling in my chest like stones. Easier for her, harder for me. I thought about the first time I noticed her slipping away. It was 3 Thanksgivings ago. I'd made my cornbread stuffing, the same recipe my mother taught me, and Hannah took one polite bite before saying it was a little too heavy. She smiled when she said it, the kind of smile people use when they're trying to sound gentle while delivering a sting. I laughed it off at the time, but inside it hurt. That was my mother's dish, my childhood in a bowl. Still, I told myself she meant well. That was my mistake, excusing the small cuts because they came wrapped in soft voices. Then there was that photo I posted of her holding her little boy outside the church after Sunday service. I thought it was beautiful. Hannah smiling, the baby's cheek pressed against her shoulder. 20 minutes later, she called. "Mom, could you take that down? It doesn't really fit our page aesthetic." Aesthetic. That word rolled around in my mind for weeks. I deleted the picture, of course, but something in me shifted. I stopped posting photos of us all together. You can't criticize what you never share. Every year after that, she made sure my role in her life grew smaller. When she called, it wasn't to talk, it was to ask for something. Babysitting when Dylan worked late. Alone just until Friday. Grocery money when the boys were sick. I never said no. I wanted to believe that helping was the same thing as belonging. I see now it wasn't. It was a way of keeping me useful, not close. I still remember wiring them $7,500 for their down payment. Dylan had lost his job, and they said they'd repay me once he got back on his feet. I told them not to worry, and they didn't. Months slid into years. The debt faded into silence, another unspoken thing between us. Sometimes I think love makes you blind to what you're really giving away. As I lay there in the dark, I could almost hear my mother's voice. She used to say, "Don't ever let people make you smaller just to keep their lives neat." I used to think she was being dramatic. Now I understood. I was the small one, the afterthought in my own family story. My eyes drifted to the photo on my dresser, the one of my mother at her kitchen table. She's smiling, but her eyes look tired. That picture was taken the year no one showed up for her Thanksgiving. I was the only one who came. She pretended everything was fine, saying they probably had things to do. But I heard her crying that night when she thought I was asleep. I told myself I'd never end up like that, waiting by the phone, forgiving people who didn't deserve it. And yet here I was, making excuses for my daughter in all the same ways. I turned onto my side, pulled the quilt tight around my shoulders, and stared at the clock. Midnight. The wind rattled the porch swing. I wondered if Hannah even realized what she had done, or if she had already moved on to planning her table setting with Dylan's parents. Maybe she was relieved not to think of me at all. A dull resentment settled low in my ribs. Not a burning anger, just a steady ache that refused to let me sleep. I thought about the words she used: smaller, easier, peaceful. Words that sounded polite but carried the weight of rejection. Every time she said "we," it felt like she was drawing a line I wasn't meant to cross. My own daughter choosing someone else's family over me, and explaining it like it was reasonable. Around 2 in the morning, I finally got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The floor was cold beneath my feet. The dishes sat where I'd left them. The napkins, folded and waiting, looked foolish now, like a promise no one meant to keep. I stared at them until my eyes blurred. That was when the thought arrived, quiet, firm, no rage attached to it. Just a sentence that felt like it had been waiting years to be spoken. No more. I whispered it aloud. It felt strange, but solid. No more waiting for her to remember me. No more apologizing for taking up space. I set my phone face down on the counter and turned off the light. The house fell back into darkness, but it didn't feel empty this time. It felt honest. For the first time, I let myself see what had been true all along. I had built my life around people who only noticed me when they needed something, and I was done pretending that was love. The morning after that long, sleepless night, I stood by the kitchen window watching frost sketch delicate white lines across the fields. The sky was pale and washed out, the kind of quiet morning that feels as if the world is holding its breath. I held a mug of coffee between my hands, though it had gone cold before I ever thought to taste it. My phone sat on the table where I'd left it, face down, its light blinking every few minutes with messages I refused to read. I already knew what they said. Polite band-aids over a deeper wound. Love you, Mom. We'll make it up to you next year. Words with no weight left in them. I should have been angry. I should have picked up the phone and demanded she explain how it became acceptable to shut out the woman who gave her everything. But I was past anger. What settled in me was colder, sharper, steadier. Resentment had burned itself down to resolve. If I wasn't welcome at her table, then I would set one of my own. I opened the old kitchen drawer and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with faded pencil marks and half-finished grocery lists. I flipped it open and began writing names, not family. That word no longer felt like it belonged to me. These were people who, like me, had been quietly forgotten. Mrs. Jennings came first, the widow down the road whose son died in Afghanistan. Last winter I saw her standing on her porch, watching other families hang Christmas lights. She'd smiled when I waved, though her eyes were wet. Then Caleb Morris, the mechanic I taught, back when I still worked at the high school. He'd sent Christmas cards 2 years in a row, always thanking me for believing in him. Next was Ruth Alvarez, the librarian who saved me new novels before anyone else. And Pastor and Mrs. Harland, whose daughter moved to Oregon and hadn't visited in years. I wrote each name slowly, almost reverently. By the time I finished, my hands felt steady again. I sent the first message. I'm hosting Thanksgiving on Thursday. You'd make the table feel warmer. It felt strange sending it, like stepping into unfamiliar territory. But one by one, replies came. I'd love to. I was going to be alone this year. You don't know how much this means, but I did. I knew exactly. When I pulled the second turkey from the freezer, my mind drifted back to Hannah. She was probably in Columbus choosing table runners with Dylan's mother, arranging candles to match the napkins, wearing that polite smile she'd perfected over the years. She'd always been that way. Polished, careful, uncomfortable with anything messy. I remembered one Christmas when she was 12, asking if we could skip decorating the tree because the old ornaments looked tacky. Those ornaments were my mother's. I'd boxed them up that night and told her we'd buy new ones next year. I should have told her no, should have told her that love isn't about appearances, it's about showing up. But I wanted her to be proud of me. I wanted to be seen. I turned on the radio, low enough not to break the morning calm. Old country songs blended with weather reports, filling the kitchen with a warm, steady rhythm. As I kneaded bread dough, the motion soothed me. The oven's heat spread through the room, and for the first time in days, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Out of habit, I picked up my phone. Another message from Hannah waited. Mom, please don't be upset. We just thought you'd be happier on your own. Happier on my own. A lie dressed as kindness. I could hear her voice in my mind. Soft, practiced, the tone she used when speaking to her children as if I needed managing. I set the phone back down and pressed my palms to the counter. For a moment, that old familiar sting rose in my throat, the one that used to stop me from saying what I truly felt. This time, I didn't swallow it. I let it sit. I thought about all the times I'd held my tongue for the sake of peace. When she rolled her eyes at my stories, when she said, "We'll just handle it," after I offered to bring dessert, when she treated being my daughter like an obligation rather than a joy. I could have called her then. I could have told her everything, the hurt, the anger, the truth she refused to see. But instead, I took a deep breath and kept kneading. My silence, for once, wasn't surrender. It was a choice. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen smelled of sage and butter, and my list of guests had grown. Mrs. Jennings would bring sweet potatoes. Ruth promised her famous apple pie. Caleb said he'd fix the flickering light in the hallway before dinner. Every message I received replaced a little piece of what Hannah had taken. As I wiped my hands on a towel, I glanced at the family photo on the fridge. Hannah, Dylan, the boys, smiling on their porch last summer. I took that picture. They didn't invite me inside. They just posed, thanked me for stopping by, and went back in to finish dinner. I remember driving home that night, wondering when my presence became something to pencil in instead of something to welcome. Now, looking at that photo, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt release. I pulled it down, placed it gently in a drawer, and replaced it with a note. Thursday, 4 p.m., our Thanksgiving. As the sun dipped low, streaks of pink and orange brushed across the fields. I stood by the window again, this time with a cup of tea, watching the light fade. The bitterness that had followed me for days began to soften. Maybe this was what freedom looked like. Not shouting, not dramatic revenge, but choosing to build something beautiful out of the space others left behind. I could have yelled. I could have begged her to understand. But I chose something quieter, something stronger. I chose to fill my home with laughter, to open my door to people who needed the same warmth I'd been denied. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. Thanksgiving evening arrived with the kind of cold that stings your cheeks the moment you step outside. By 4 o'clock, the first guests were already making their way up the long gravel drive. The sun hung low, turning the frost on the fields into a soft shimmer. I watched from the window as Mrs. Jennings stepped out of her car, holding a casserole dish as if it were something fragile. Behind her came Caleb, wiping his hands on a rag, still carrying the faint scent of motor oil and soap. The Harlands arrived next, their old pickup rattling in its familiar way, and Ruth Alvarez showed up last, holding 2 pies wrapped in checkered towels. For a moment, I just stood there, watching their breath rise in white clouds as they walked toward my porch. Something warm unfurled in my chest, steady, quiet, right. When I opened the door, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon butter spilled into the cold. Everyone came in smiling, shaking off the chill. "Maggie, it smells like heaven in here," Mrs. Jennings said, her eyes soft with gratitude. I helped her slip out of her coat, noticing the slight tremble in her hands. "Well," I said, "it's been too quiet around here. I thought it was time to fix that." We gathered in the kitchen first, everyone talking over one another in a comforting hum. Ruth set her pies down and laughed. "You really outdid yourself," she said. "2 turkeys?" I nodded. "One to eat and one for leftovers. I always make too much." It was easier to say that than to admit I'd planned it that way, imagining Hannah and her family sitting down miles away at a smaller table without me. By the time we finally sat, the dining room felt alive. Candles flickered, plates clattered, laughter rose like music. For the first time in years, my table wasn't filled with polite small talk or carefully measured smiles. It was real. People were telling stories that mattered, stories about loss, about hope, about what it takes to keep going. I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. At one point, Caleb lifted his glass. "To Maggie," he said, "for saving Thanksgiving." The others joined in, their glasses chiming softly. I smiled, though a small ache lingered, the quiet knowledge that it should have been my daughter making that toast. Across the state, I knew Hannah was sitting at Dylan's parents' table, probably fussing over whether everything looked perfect, offering that careful smile she saved for people she wanted to impress. I could almost hear her saying, "We like to keep things small, simple." The thought didn't anger me, it tired me. I had spent too many years trying to fit into a life she had already left behind. Then something unexpected happened. As we passed the rolls, Mrs. Jennings reached for my hand. "You have no idea what this means," she whispered. "I haven't been invited anywhere for Thanksgiving in 3 years." Her eyes filled. Before I could stop myself, mine did too. The room went quiet, but not in an empty way, in a full, sacred way. I squeezed her hand. "You're welcome here anytime," I said, and meant it. Saying it loosened something in me that had been knotted for years. Later that night, after dessert and long stories and more laughter than I'd heard in ages, everyone gathered their coats. Ruth hugged me tight. "You made this a holiday again," she whispered. When the last car drove away, the house felt warm and soft. I stood in the kitchen amid half-empty pie plates, smudged glasses, and crumbs on the tablecloth, and for once the mess felt beautiful. My phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't need to look. I knew. Hannah. It rang again and again, lighting up the room in quick, nervous flashes. I let it go to voicemail. When it stopped, I listened. Her voice was tight, strained. "Mom, can you please call me? We saw some photos online. I didn't know you were having people over. I need to talk to you." A breath. I think I made a mistake. I touched the edge of the phone but didn't answer. Every word was tangled with guilt, and though some part of me longed to hear her say she was sorry, another part knew this moment wasn't about her. For years, I had begged for scraps of her attention. Tonight, I had fed an entire table. The phone lit up again. I turned it face down. I walked to the window, where frost had crept back across the glass. Outside, the sky was dark and still. My reflection looked back at me, older, steadier, free. "It's okay, Hannah," I whispered. "You can keep your smaller table." Then I blew out the candles one by one, watching each flame disappear until the room was held only by the soft glow of the kitchen light. The house creaked gently as it settled around me, warm, quiet, finally at peace. After everyone left, the house felt quiet but not empty. The dishes were still on the table, the candles had burned low, and the air was thick with the lingering scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey. I sat there for a while, my hands resting on the tablecloth, watching thin curls of smoke drift from the candle wicks. The only sounds were the faint hum of the heater and the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Then my phone lit up again. I didn't need to check the screen. Hannah. The soft glow pulsed in the dim room, her name appearing over and over. I picked up the phone, not to answer, but to listen. Her message was shaky, her voice tight with panic. "Mom, I'm sorry, I should have invited you. Please call me back." Every word carried its own weight. She wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by me. I could hear guilt tangled with confusion. She hadn't expected me to move on, to have a life that didn't orbit hers. For years, she'd been the one to decide when we spoke, when I was included, when I mattered. And now, for once, the choice wasn't hers. I set the phone back down without responding. The sound of her voice stirred something deep. Not anger this time, but a slow ache. All those years spent shaping myself into someone she might admire, only to discover she'd stopped looking long ago. I'd tried to be useful, patient, gentle. I'd swallowed every hurt to keep the peace. But the peace had never belonged to me. I stood and began clearing the plates, stacking them gently by the sink. The soft clink of china was a reminder that life was moving on, whether she approved or not. I thought about the way she'd said smaller when she uninvited me, the way she'd traded love for appearances, connection for convenience. It wasn't just a dinner she had taken from me. It was the belief that I still had a place at her table. But tonight changed that. Tonight, I had found another table, another kind of family, one built on choice, not obligation. As I wiped the table clean, I noticed a small drawing one of the neighbor kids had left behind, a crayon turkey with my name written beneath it in wobbly letters. Miss Maggie's feast, it said. My throat tightened. I pressed it against my chest for a moment before sticking it to the refrigerator with a magnet. It didn't undo the years I'd lost with Hannah, but it felt like the start of something new, something honest. The phone buzzed again, skittering across the counter. Another message. Mom, please. The boys want to talk to you. They're asking why you weren't here. I didn't mean to hurt you. Her words were a familiar mixture of apology and control. I didn't mean to hurt you, as though intention could erase impact. I stared at the phone until it stopped vibrating. Resentment isn't always loud. Sometimes it sits quietly in your chest, like a breath you never quite release. It's hearing an apology and knowing the person isn't sorry for the pain, only sorry they lost the power to fix it on their terms. I took a long breath and let it go. I didn't delete the message, I just let it be, a relic of a past I no longer had to carry. I poured myself a small glass of apple cider and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cold but clean. Snow had begun to fall, slow, soft flakes drifting onto the fields, covering everything in white. The world was still, the kind of stillness that feels like forgiveness. I wrapped my sweater tighter and felt a quiet smile pull at my lips, surprised by the peace settling over me after so many years of being afraid to speak, to act, to live for myself. Behind me, the house glowed warm through the kitchen windows. For the first time, I didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. I had built something of my own, small, quiet, real. I wasn't waiting by the phone anymore. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I looked out at the falling snow and whispered, "You don't have to deserve love. Sometimes rejection is just the world's way of reminding you where you belong." And as the flakes touched my skin, I knew I'd remember this moment. The stillness, the peace, the freedom. I turned back toward the house, the day's laughter still lingering like warmth in the air, and thought, if you're hearing this, don't wait for someone else to recognize your worth. Set your own table, fill it with people who show up, and when they do, open the door.